Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to go through a series of hands-on labs related to Azure Fundamentals. This hands-on lab is created thinking about Azure beginners in mind. We will go through things like how to create a virtual machine to how to configure and create your storage account, how to create your Azure IoT hub to how to create your Azure functions. And towards the end of this exercise, you will learn how to price up a solution with Azure Pricing Calculator and things like how to raise a support ticket and use TCO calculator, things like that. So if you're a beginner, you don't have to look any further. I hope you find the information provided in this lab exercise useful. Alright, so in the first hands-on lab exercise, we are going to create a virtual machine in the Azure portal. So in this hands-on lab, we are going to see three tasks. First, we will create a virtual machine using the Azure portal. Then we will connect to the virtual machine. And on the third task, we are going to install the web server role and test if the virtual machine is working or not. Let's go and do that. I'm on my Azure portal. This is where you would be able to perform all of the tasks what I'm going to mention in this hands-on lab exercise. If you're a beginner and you don't know anything about this Azure portal, please watch my Azure Fundamentals course where I explain all of these things in detail. So to create a virtual machine, you can either click on this virtual machine and start from there, or you could use the global search box to search for a particular Azure service and you can create a service from there as well. What I'm going to do, I'm going to click on create a resource and create a brand new resource from this way. So click on create a resource. Within that, select virtual machine. The first step is to make sure that you have selected the right subscription. This is only relatable if you have multiple subscription attached to one single Azure tenant. So since I don't have multiple tenants, so I can leave it at the default. The next step is to select or create a new resource group. So if you do happen to have resource groups within your Azure subscription, you can basically go and select it. If you don't want to use an existing resource group, you can either click on create a new resource, give a name for your resource group and click OK. So I'm going to select an existing one. The next steps are all about giving a name to the virtual machine and you're going to select where you want to place these virtual machines, etc. So I'm going to give a name for my virtual machine. I'm going to call this as my virtual machine or my VM. The next step is to pick a right region. So picking a region is based on where you would like to host these virtual machines. Microsoft Azure has many regions across the world. So the idea behind choosing a virtual machine or any resource placing in a region is based on where you want to deploy this. Ideally, this will be closest to where your users are going to access this service from. For this lab exercise, I'm going to retain East US. Under availability option for this lab, I'm going to retain no infrastructure required because we are going to delete all the resources we are going to create right after this exercise. Security type, retain standard. Under image, this is where you would come and pick the right image what you want for your virtual machine. Here you can see different flavors or different virtual machine images from various vendors. So what I am after is Windows Server operating system. So I'm going to pick Windows Server 2019 Generation 2. I'm not going to enable the Azure Sport instance because this is another way you can get additional benefit from Microsoft. If you pick a Spot instance, the price would be a little cheaper compared to the regular standard one. So ignore that for the moment. The next step is a quite important step. This is where you are gonna pick a right size what you want for your virtual machine. Microsoft have different varieties of sizes available for you to pick. This size include nothing but the number of virtual CPUs what you want to allocate for your virtual machine and how much GB of memory you want to allocate for these virtual machines. I will create a separate video on explaining different VM family sizes, things like that. So at this moment, I'm going to pick D2S version 3. This will give me 2 virtual CPUs and 8 gigabits of memory on this one single virtual machine. The next step is to provide the username and password for your virtual machine. So I'm going to first give the username for this standard virtual machine. The admin account, I'm going to give it as Azure user and I'm going to provide a password for this virtual machine. The next step is where you're going to decide what sort of an inbound port rules you want to allow for this virtual machine. This again is quite an important step. Usually you should go with none because you should use different ways to allow access to your virtual machine other than RDP. But for this instance, I'm going to allow RDP because we are going to test this virtual machine using the RDP port. Under allow selected port, I'm going to expand it, make sure that I'm going to select RDP, and I'm going to select HTTP as well because we're going to test this web server role on this virtual machine. Click on disk to see what type of disk modification you can do on this virtual machine. Under disk, you would be able to pick what type of hard disk you want to allocate on this virtual machine. So you have multiple options here. Standard hard disk will give you magnetic type of disk. Standard SSD and premium SSD will give you SSD performance on your virtual machine. So this will guarantee you high IOPS compared to a standard hard disk. So I'm going to retain premium SSD, leave the rest of the default values, click on networking. When you create a virtual machine, if you don't have a virtual network already, Azure subscription will automatically create a new virtual network, subnet, and public IP address for you. If you don't want to use this, you can always create a brand new one. Or if you already have a different virtual network available in the same resource group, you can very well go and pick a different virtual network as well. So I'm going to retain the default one, which is created by default. Under management tab, I'm going to disable the boot diagnostic because this is again a test environment which I don't want to use it. That's pretty much it. And then you go and hit on review plus create. This goes through a first time validation to make sure that all the parameters you have selected is valid for creating this virtual machine. After you get this validation passed message, you can again go hit on create. This process can take anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes to deploy the virtual machine. After this is done, we will receive an update on the deployment page. And another way to make sure everything is working fine is to keep a tab on the notification tab. You can access the notification tab by clicking on this bell icon, and this is where you would be able to find the latest deployment which is in progress in your Azure subscription. Looks like our deployment is completed. So either we can click on go to resource from here, or we can click on go to resource from here as well. So I'm going to click on go to resource. So this is the VM which we created just now, my virtual machine. So under overview tab, you would be able to find the details of the virtual machine. First, you can see where it is deployed. This is the resource group we chose. The status is running. That means the virtual machine is ready for you to use. Where is the location, which is East US, that is what we created. And other important details like the size of the virtual machine, which is D2S V3. That's what we wanted. 2 core and 8 GB RAM, and the public IP address. That is what we are going to use to connect to this virtual machine. So to connect the virtual machine, go to click on connect. There are multiple ways you can connect it using Bastion, SSH, or RDP. I'm going to use RDP. Click on RDP. Under RDP, make sure you select the public IP address and click on download RDP file. After the download, click on open the file. Click on connect. The admin username we have given for this virtual machine is Azure user, and provide the password for this virtual machine and click yes. So now we are signing into the virtual machine we just now created. You can see the public IP listed here, which is 20.231.97.231. I'm going to give a couple of seconds for this virtual machine to properly boot up and initialize the first default settings. I'm going to accept the default network. So we have completed the first two tasks, which was creating a virtual machine and connecting to the virtual machine. The third task is to install the web server role and test it. So let's go and do that. To install the web server role, I'm going to go to this newly created virtual machine, right click and launch the PowerShell. And I'm going to select the Windows PowerShell in the admin mode. So let me quickly increase the size of the PowerShell so you can see what I'm going to run. To install the web server role on this virtual machine, you just need to run this command and hit enter. So right now it is installing the feature which is web server on this virtual machine. Alright, so the web server role is being installed and configured. Now we can go and test if it is working. So I'm gonna minimize this virtual machine. cancel this. Let's go back to the Azure portal and click on My Virtual Machine. On the overview page, we're going to just copy the public IP address of this virtual machine and go to a new tab and paste the IP address of this virtual machine. I mean the public IP address of the virtual machine, and hit enter. Now we can see the default IIS web server page. So this is a proof that we are able to connect to the web server we just installed on that virtual machine using the public IP address. So that's how you create a brand new virtual machine in Azure and test if the virtual machine is running or not. So I hope you find the information useful. So this is the second lab from the Azure Fundamentals series. In this lab, we will create a new web app that runs on Docker container. And we are going to make sure that the container displays a welcome message. And finally, we are going to test this web application. So let's go and do that. To create a web application, you can either use the global search box to search or click on create a resource. So I'm going to click on app services and click on create. So Azure App Service is actually a collection of 4 services, all of which are built to help you host and run web applications. The 4 services are web apps, mobile apps, API apps, and logic apps. They all look different, but in the end, they all operate in the very similar ways. The one which we are going to create right now is a web app. So web apps are the most commonly used of these 4 services. So first step is to make sure you select the right subscription and create a new resource group or select an existing one. So for this exercise, I'm going to select an existing one and give a name for your web application. So I'm going to call it My Docker Web App. And under Publish, make sure you select Docker container instead of code. Under Operating System, select Linux and pick a region where you want to host it. I'm going to select East US. After that, click on Docker. So this is where we are going to configure the Docker container information. Under Options, select a single container. Image source, select Docker Hub. Access type as public. Under image and tag, I'm going to give Azure Docs ACI Hello World command. The startup command is not required for this exercise. This is completely optional. And click on Review and Create. After the validation, click on Create. Looks like our deployment is completed, so click on Go to Resource. Alright, so this is the newly created Docker instance. Now let's test the web app. To test the web app, all we have to do is go to the URL of the web app. You can find the URL under Overview tab and make sure you click on this URL. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this URL, go to another tab, and I'm going to paste this URL. Alright, so that's our Docker web app which is running in a container instance. And if you go back to your Overview tab and if you scroll down a little bit, this is where you can see different tabs and charts, and this can help you get more information regarding how your web application is running in the container instance. So since this is our test lab, we don't have much information, but in the real environment, this is where you can come and get more information regarding how your container is running. Alright, so that's the end of creating web application lab. So this one is the third lab. In the third lab, we are going to deploy Azure container instances. This is somewhat similar to the previous task what we did on deploying the web app. In this task, we are going to create a container instance and we are going to verify the deployment of the container instance. So let's go to the Azure portal and click on Create a Resource. And on the search box, type in Container Instances and select Azure Service Microsoft Container Instances and click on Create. We're going to retain the same resource group what we've been using so far. Give a name for your container. I'm going to call it as My Container. Pick a region where you want to deploy it. I'm going to deploy it in East US. Under image source, I'm going to select other registry. Image type as public. Under image name, I'm going to give an example one, which is Hello World. Scroll down. Under operating system, select Linux. Size, just leave it as default because we are anyway going to delete it afterwards. So if you do want to change the size of the container instance where it is running, you can click on change size to do that. Next, click on networking. Under networking type, we are going to retain public. That means your container will be publicly reachable at DNS name -label.region.azurecontainer.io. So now next task is to provide the DNS name label. So I'm going to call it my container and my resource group name and hit on review plus create. After the validation, click on create. So while the deployment is happening, if you want to see the sample code which I used for the deployment, you can go to the GitHub page. This is where you can find the one which I'm using right now. So the one which I'm using right now is a very simple Node.js application used to demonstrate this container instances. Looks like our deployment has been completed. Click on go to resource. Alright, so this is the container page and go to the overview tab. This is where you would be able to find the information regarding your containers. So what we are interested right now is the FQDN of this container. So hover your mouse over the FQDN, you will get a details like you will get an option to copy the FQDN. So click on that and I'm going to go to another tab and I'm going to paste this container web address. All right. So that's our sample container and it is running. It is running on the default web page. Another way to connect to the container instance is to use the public IP address. So I'm going to copy that and go to another tab and put your public IP address to the container. And this is running the same container instance what we used to connect using the FQDN. All right, so I hope you learned how to deploy a application to a container using Azure Container Instance. So this is lab 4. In this lab exercise, we are going to learn how to create a virtual network. Not only that, we are going to deploy 2 virtual machines onto the virtual network we are going to create, then configure them to allow one virtual machine to ping the other within the virtual network. That's what we're going to do. So let's do that. So let's start by creating the virtual network. So go to click on create a resource. I'm going to type in virtual network and hit enter. Select the one which says virtual network Microsoft Azure service and click and hit on create. Just like the previous labs, I'm going to retain the same subscription. Resource group, I'm going to select an existing one. Give a name for your virtual network. I'm going to call it VNet1. In the region, like before, I'm going to keep it under East US. Click on IP addresses. Under IP addresses, by default, there will be an IP address space given. So if you want to retain that, you can retain that. I'm going to modify into 10.1.0.0/16. Similarly, if you scroll down, there will be a default subnet created sometimes. If not, all you have to do is click on add a subnet, type in default, and the subnet IP address is 10.1.0.0/24 and click on add. After that, click on review and create. After the validation, click on create. Alright, so our virtual network is created. So let's go to resource to see the details. Again, within the VNet, you can check the address space. And if you want to modify that under settings, you can go to address space. And this is where you would be able to modify it. You can add additional address ranges as well. Another important thing is subnets. In the future, if you do want to add more subnets to segregating different workloads, or to create a subnet for gateways, things like that, this is where you would be able to do that. So right now we have our default subnet and the VNet created. So in the next task, we are going to create 2 virtual machines and we're going to place those virtual machines in the VNet. So to do that, we already learned how to create a virtual machine. So simply go to virtual machines, click on create Azure virtual machine, give a name. I'm going to call it as VM1. I'm going to keep it in East US. No infrastructure needed. Under image, I'm going to select Windows Server 2019 Gen 2. And you know all of the rest of the default details like size and things like that. So I'm not going to explain again. Give the username and password. Since we have to check if the connection is working, I'm going to enable RDP on both the virtual machine. And click on review and create. And click on create. So the deployment is in progress. So while that is happening, I'm going to go back to the Azure portal and we are going to create one more virtual machine. So you know the process. I'm going to quickly create another virtual machine, retain the same resource group. I'm going to call it a VM2. The location is East US data center. The image type is Windows Server 2019 data center Gen 2. Username Azure user. Provide the password. Under disk, we are not changing anything. Under networking, looks like our other deployment is completed, so that's fine. We'll go back to that later. Again, under networking, make sure that you allocate that virtual machine again to the VNet1 we created. and the public IP address is VM2 public IP address, and click on review and create, and click on create. So let's go back to the home page and go to the virtual machines. So the first virtual machine is created and the status is running. If you hit refresh, we will probably see the other virtual machine is being created. Yep, we can see that the second virtual machine is in the creating stage. So let's do one more refresh. Yep, both of our virtual machines are created and the status is running. Now let's go and log in or connect to both these virtual machines. I'm going to use connect RDP and click on download RDP file and open file and click on connect. The username is Azure user, provide the password and hit OK to connect. While that is happening, I'm going to connect to the virtual machine 2. Let's quickly minimize this. Go to VM2 again under RDP, download the RDP file and open the second VM RDP file. Click on connect, provide the username and password, hit OK and hit yes. And let's open both of these virtual machines side by side so that it is easy for us to check the settings or the status of the connection. So this is VM2. Alright, so I'm gonna first go to the PowerShell on the first virtual machine and let's increase the size. And similarly, I'm gonna open PowerShell on the second virtual machine as well. Alright, on the first virtual machine, try to ping the second one. So I type in command called ping VM2. At the same time, go to the second virtual machine and try to ping VM1. Alright, so the request timeout error what you are seeing here is because the firewall is turned on. So let's go and turn off the firewall. So to do that, go to start, click on settings, click on network and internet, locate Windows firewall and disable both public and private firewall. So I'm going to disable the private firewall as well. And I'm going to repeat the same step in VM2 as well. Alright, so the firewall is being turned off on both of these virtual machines. Let's go back to the PowerShell command and let's run this command one more time. So I'm going to ping VM2 and on the second VM, I'm going to ping VM1. Alright, so as you can see that both of our virtual machines are placed in a same virtual network, same subnet, and we disable the firewall. Now we can see these two virtual machines can communicate between each other. Alright, I hope you learned how to configure and deploy two virtual machines in a virtual network and then you are able to connect them. In this lab exercise, we are going to create a blob storage. Then I will help you understand how you can work with the blob storage files. Towards the end, I will give you tips on how you can monitor the storage account. So let's go and do that. First step, let's go and create the blob storage. So click on storage accounts and in the top, click on create. Just like the previous labs, we're going to retain the same resource group and the subscription. Scroll down till you find the storage account name. The storage account name has to be a unique one. So I'm going to call my storage account and the number, which is unique. So, and I'm going to retain the region as East US. There are two types of performance. I'm going to retain standard. The premium one will give you low latency and high IOPS. Under redundancy, I'm going to select locally redundant storage because this is a test environment and I don't want high availability. Click on advanced and we are not modifying anything. This is where you have an ability to integrate with your Azure AD. You can convert this to a dead lake storage as well if you want. Click on networking to add any sort of public endpoint or private endpoints. So we will learn this in advanced lab, so I'm not going to touch it. So basically go and click on review and create. After the validation, click on create. Alright, so our storage account is being deployed. So click on go to resource. So under the overview tab, you can check the performance and the replication style of this storage account, what type of storage account it is. This is general purpose V2. If you scroll down on the left hand side, you can see there are 4 types of storages you can create within this: table storage, queue storages, file shares, and containers. So for this exercise, we're going to limit our focus to containers. So within the container, if you want to create a new blob container, click on create a new container and give a name. So I'm going to call it container 1. There are 3 types of access levels. There is private, that means there is no anonymous access; blob, which is anonymous reader access for blobs only; and then there is a container, which is anonymous read access for containers and blobs. So we're going to retain private. Under advanced, if you want to modify anything else, you can do that. So I'm not going to do anything. Click on create. So we created our first container. So let's click on the container we created. This is where you would be able to upload, download files, or you could use other solutions like Azure Storage Explorer or AZ Copy to upload and download files as well. So let's click on upload. So I'm gonna locate some files within my local machine. Let's go to desktop. I don't have any files, so I'm gonna create a new text file. So I created a sample text file. Click on that, click on open and upload. So similar way, you can upload as many blobs as you like, and the new blobs will be listed within the container. Once the file is uploaded, you can simply click on the file. This will give you information about how you can access this file, the versions, the type of the file, access tier, etc. So that's how you create a new container within the blob storage. So another type of storage is file share. So you can go to data storage and you can click on file shares. So similarly, you can click on add file share. Give a name for your file share. I'm going to call it sample SMB. There are different tiers available: cool, hot, and transaction optimized. These give you ability to choose how you want to categorize this file share, and each of these tiers have a specific pricing associated with it. So I'm going to retain transaction optimized and click on create. After you create the file share, to connect the file share, all you have to do is click on connect. You can assign a drive letter. So let's assign probably T. Let's see in my local machine what drive is allocated. So I don't have any map drive. So let's go back and retain T as the drive letter. Authentication method, I'm going to retain storage account key and just simply copy this to the clipboard. So on my local machine, I'm going to open the PowerShell and run the command. So right now what it is doing is it is trying to connect to the file share we just now created. So on the side, let's open our file explorer and let's see if we can see something happening on the local machine. Yeah, looks like our command is being executed. It says that the storage account is being mapped to the local machine. On your local machine, you can see that there is a file share created. So I can double tap and it's an empty container. So what I can do, I can create a new file here as well. So I created a file called sample SMB test. So now if I go back to my Azure portal, minimize all of this window, close it, I can use this upload button to upload and download as well. So I'm going to quickly refresh to see if the newly created file can be visible here. Yep, as you can see that you can see the files within the Azure portal as well. Now that task is been done, the last task is to monitor the storage account. So let's go and do that. So to monitor the storage account, let's go back to your storage accounts. Select the storage account which you want to monitor. Onto the storage account page, click on diagnose and solve problems. So this is where you would be able to go through the common problems and troubleshooting options. You can check the health related issues or any changes which happen to your storage account. If you do want to troubleshoot any of it, you can click on any of these links. Like if your disk is slow or you need an extra support in terms of import and export or move your data, all of this can be checked from here. Another one which I want to show you is the monitoring piece of it. So scroll down on the left hand side, go to the monitoring tab and click on insights. This is where you would be able to get informations on failures, any sort of performance issues on your storage account, availability and capacity. Since this is a test account and we don't have much of the things happening within the storage account, you won't be able to see the graph. But in the real world, if you click on the actual storage account which is being used, you would be able to see a lot of information here, which is very meaningful for your day-to-day work. All right, so congratulations. So you have created a storage account and then worked with the blob storage account. In this lab exercise, we are going to create SQL database in Azure. After creating the Azure SQL database, we are going to test the database, and I will show you what are the different ways you can test it and connect to your database queries. So let's go and do that. To create an Azure SQL database, click on Go to Resource and click on Create a Resource and type in SQL Databases and hit Enter and select the Azure SQL Microsoft Azure Service and click on Create. Within this, we can create either Azure SQL databases or SQL managed instances and SQL running on a virtual machine as well. So for this demo, I'm going to specifically limit myself in talking about Azure SQL databases. We will talk about Azure SQL managed instance and SQL running on virtual machines and the differences between these two on upcoming videos. So click on Create. Just like our previous labs, I'm going to retain the default on subscription. I'm going to select an existing resource group and give a name for your database. I'm going to call my database DB1. We don't have an SQL server at the moment, so click on Create New. Give a name for your server. I'm going to call it SQL Server and the number of the resource group. Location I'm going to retain in East US. Scroll down. Under authentication, you have multiple options. I'm going to retain use SQL authentication. Give a name for your SQL user. I'm going to call it SQL user and provide a password and click on OK. Under redundancy, I'm going to keep it locally redundant backup storage. And the next step is to modify the networking. So click on networking. Under networking, we need a network connectivity to test it. So change from no access to public endpoint. Scroll down to view the firewall rules. Change the value to yes under allow Azure services and resources to access this server. If you do want to add current IP addresses to the firewall rule, you can say yes. Now click on security. We are not making any changes to the default value under security. Click on additional settings. So since this is a brand new database, I don't have any data in there. So you can either add a backup from a backup file or you can include a sample database. This will by default give us Adventure Work Limited sample database within this newly created database. So I'm going to select sample and scroll down and click on Review and Create. After the validation, click on Create. The validation is failed. Let me go and review what changes I have to do. So click on previous. All right, so under security, I don't want to enable the Microsoft Defender for SQL now. So I'm going to click on not now and let's click on review and create and click on create. All right, so now it started the deployment of our first SQL server and we have made sure that we added a sample database in it so that we can query the database. So our deployment is in progress. It would approximately take 2 to 5 minutes to deploy this. All right, so our deployment is completed. So let's click on Go to Resource to go to newly created database. This is the database page. You can access the server name from here. It is not an elastic pool, it's a single database. To access the database, let's go to Query Editor. You can find that on the left hand side of the database. It's called Query Editor Preview. So click on that and try to connect to the database using the password and the username you created. So I used SQL user as the username and I put in the password and I'm going to click on OK. Since we have added the IP address of this server local machine, that's why we are able to connect in. Otherwise, we have to go back to the firewall settings to connect or add the IP address. I'll show you where to do that. So since we are connected, so let's run the query. So I'm going to run a sample query here and click on run. Since we have the database, it is going to return the value from that sample database. All right, so we are able to see all the values based on the query we ran. On the left hand side, you can see the tables which is available in the database. Now let me quickly show you if you run into any connection issues where you can fix it. Go back to the main database. Under the overview page, this time click on Set Server Firewall. So click on that. If you have not added your IP address, this is where you will be able to add a client IP. Since we have already added for this server, this actually duplicated the value one more time. Otherwise, this is where you add the server value and hit on save. Then from that local device, you would be able to connect to your database without any problem. All right, so congratulations. So in this task, you have learned how to create an SQL database in Azure, and you have learned how to successfully query the data in that database. All right, so in this lab, we are going to implement an Azure IoT hub. Then we are going to authenticate a connection to an IoT device using an online Raspberry Pi device simulator. Sensor data and messages are passed from the Raspberry Pi simulator to your Azure IoT hub, and you can view the metrics for the messaging activities in the Azure portal. So let's go and do that. Within your Azure portal, go to your global search box and type in IoT hub and select the service. We don't have any IoT hub at the moment, so I'm going to click on create. Make sure you pick the right subscription. I'm going to keep an existing resource group for this exercise, and I'm going to call it as my hub group for my IoT hub name. Region, I'm going to retain in East US itself. Let's click on networking. We are going to allow the public access for this configuration. Click on management. This is where you would be able to pick different pricing tiers. So for this exercise, I'm going to keep S1, which is a standard tier. And you have an option to modify the number of IoT hub units as well here. So we are not making any changes here. So I'm going to click on create. After the validation, click on create. After this deployment, we are going to add an IoT device. So let's wait for this deployment to finish. All right, so looks like the deployment is completed. So you can click on go to resource to go to newly created IoT hub. So to add a new device to your IoT hub, on the left hand side, right under device management, click on devices. This is where you can add a device, or if you do happen to have multiple devices already registered, you can find a device on this page. So I'm going to click on add a device. The first step is to provide a name for your device. So I'm going to call it as my Raspberry Pi, and I'm going to click on save. After that, you would be able to find your device on this page. So click on your device. This is where you would be able to find the primary key, secondary key, your connection string for your device, etc. So for this exercise, we are going to copy the primary string or primary connection string. So you can either view the information, or you can simply click on copy to your clipboard. So I'm going to launch another tab to go to the Raspberry Pi simulator. So this is where you can connect to your Raspberry Pi simulator. So this is our simulation Raspberry on the left hand side, and the right hand side you can see the code. So let me quickly increase the size so you would be able to see the code on your screen. So in the code area, we are trying to locate the connection string. You can see that the line number 15, you can see the constant connection string. So this is where I'm going to replace the value with the connection string. So I'm going to go back again, copy the primary key, and I'm going to select this, and I'm going to delete the value within this bracket, and I'm going to replace it with the value we just copied. All right, so I just copied the value. After that, you can click on run. So this is going to run this application now. So you can see the console is showing some sort of a connection progress. It is sending the message, and it's saying that the message is sent to Azure IoT Hub. And on the left hand side, you can see that the LED light is blinking every now and then. I think in a second it blinks once, and every time it does that, the data and the messages are sent. Each time the Raspberry Pi simulator LED flashes to your Azure IoT Hub. So if you want to stop it, you can click on stop. And if you want to run again, you can click on run again. So now that the data is sending, let's go back to our Azure IoT Hub and see if we can see any details there. So I'm going to go back to my Raspberry Pi Azure IoT Hub. Let's go back to your IoT Hub itself. So go back to your page, click on overview. Under overview page, scroll down. This is where you would be able to see the usage. Under the IoT Hub usage, this is where you can see, based on your pricing tier, how many number of messages you have used so far, what's your quota limit, how many number of devices you connected, etc. To see the messages in the graph, it would take some time. It's not immediate real time. So what we are going to do is we are going to wind up this lab here and we are going to go through the next lab. I hope you find this information useful. In this lab exercise, we are going to create a function app to display a hello message when there is an HTTP request. So let's go and do that. So to create a function app, I'm going to go to the global search box and search for function app and select the function app. Click on create. Make sure you select the right subscription and a resource group. Give a name for your function app. I'm going to call it function and my subscription ID. Under publish, you have two options, code or Docker container. I'm going to select code. Under runtime stack, select .NET. Version, I'm going to keep it 3.1. Region, I am selecting East US. We are not going to make any changes under hosting or networking or monitoring. I'm going to click on review and create. After the validation, click on create. So right now it is deploying the resource. Looks like our deployment is completed. Click on go to resource to see the newly created function app. So to see the status of your function, is it running or not? You can check the status here, which says it's running. Another way you can find out is to go and search for function app itself. And right on this page, if you have multiple function app, you can check the status by looking into the function app status. Is it running or stopped? So let's go inside the function app. What we are going to do right now, we are going to create a HTTP triggered function and we're going to test it. So on the function page on the left hand side, under functions, click on functions. We don't have any at the moment, so click on create. This is where you would be able to search for predefined templates provided by Microsoft. I'm going to select the first one, which is HTTP trigger, and click on create. Under the HTTP trigger 1 page, right under developer, click on code plus test. So in this page, you can see an auto-generated code, and this code is designed to run an HTTP request and log information. So you can see that this is specifically created to send the HTTP request and logger information. So if you scroll down, this is where you would be able to find that if the function is executed successfully, you can see that it is going to return the value hello. So we are not going to modify anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the function URL. You can find the function URL on the top of this page. This page is called function editor page. So click on get function URL. Under the get function URL, make sure you select the URL. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to another tab, execute the URL you sent. So let me quickly increase the size of this page so you can see the message. So it says that the HTTP trigger function executed successfully, and pass a name in the query string or in the request body for a personalized response. So I'm going to give a name on the URL itself. I'm going to add a name equal to and a guide to cloud. So I'm going to execute that. So now you can see that the value is being changed to hello, a guide to cloud. So this is a quick example of how you can create a function app. And when you run this function app, every sort of invocation is traced. To view the traces, you can go to the Azure portal and you can see the details. So let's go back to the Azure portal. On the function editor page, this time click on monitor. So this is where you would be able to configure application insight by selecting the timestamp, and you can click run query in application insights. Alright, so I hope the information provided in this lab was helpful. Let's go and perform another lab. In this lab exercise, we are going to create a virtual machine using a template. After that, we are going to verify and monitor the virtual machine we created using this deployment template. So let's go and do that. So to search for a virtual machine template, you can go to either GitHub or Azure Quick Start Template Gallery. So I'm going to go to Azure Quick Start Template Gallery. So this is where you would be able to find the templates provided by Microsoft, or at least curated by Microsoft, which many community people comment on it, and you can go and read through the details about these templates, things like that. In this gallery, you will find many popular and recently updated templates, and these templates automate the deployment of Azure resources, including the installation of popular software packages. You can use this search box to search for any templates you are looking for. and you might find something which is of interest for you. So let's search for a simple Windows virtual machine deployment template. I'm going to search for deploy a simple Windows virtual machine. So this looks like a simple template. I just want to show you how this works. I don't want to deploy a complicated one. So let's select that. This is where you can find the details about this template. You can click on this deploy to Azure to directly deploy this template, or you can browse to GitHub to find more information related to this template. Within GitHub, you can either click on visualize to see how and what are the resources which is going to be deployed when you deploy this template. If you want to have a read about what are the information comes with this template, you can do that. So what we are going to do is we are going to deploy it to Azure. So when you click on this link, it actually open in another tab. Because we have logged into this session using an Azure username and password, it automatically logged into that tenant. You can basically go and provide these values like admin username and password and pick a resource group where you want to deploy and click on review and create. This is basically going to deploy this virtual machine for you. So I want to quickly show you what else you can do. Click on edit this template. So this resource manager template format uses the JSON format. So this is where you would be able to find the parameters and variables. So let's look at or locate the parameter for the virtual machine name. So let's scroll down to find the parameter for virtual machine. All right, we have the virtual machine size, location. If you notice here, line number 93, you can see that there is a parameter specified for virtual machine name. And the value which is given is simple virtual machine. So I'm going to change the value to my VM template. So this is how you can customize this template and make it your own as well. Let's hit save and go back to the template deployment. I'm going to pick a resource group, and under admin username, I'm going to provide a username and I'm going to provide the password for the user. Rest all the details, I'm going to keep it as it is when it came with the template, like the virtual machine size, the public IP SKU, and public IP allocation method. As you can see that the VM name is changed to my VM template rather than the simple VM. So click on review and create. This goes through the first validation. After that, click on create. Now this is going through a deployment. Just like any other virtual machine, this would ideally take about 2 to 3 minutes to complete the deployment process. Alright, so our deployment is completed. I can click on go to resource to go and see the newly created virtual machine. So you can see that the template deployment has been completed, and this is the resource group where all the resources are placed. Along with the template deployment, you can see that there is a storage account created. There is a network security group which is associated with the IP and the NIC. There is a public IP network interface. The virtual machine itself that is named as my virtual machine template. There are a couple of disks which is associated with this virtual machine, disk 1 and disk 2. And there is a VNet which this template virtual machine resides to. So click on my template. So this is the virtual machine we deployed using the template. If you want to monitor this virtual machine, you can scroll down. Under overview tab, click on monitoring. This is where you would be able to monitor the status of this virtual machine. There are different types of charts which are provided by Microsoft, which include you can look at CPU average, network total, or disk byte total, etc. So there are different operations when it performs within this virtual machine. You can come over here and check the status of this virtual machine. I always go and check the network performance and the CPU average performance to make sure that whether the virtual machine size is adequate for the workload what we deployed. If I see that constantly the CPU average is peaking above 80-85%, I know that I have to either change the VM family size to give more resources for that virtual machine. If you want to customize any of these values, you can click on any of these charts and you can click on add a metric. And this is where you would be able to add extra metrics to change the way you want to see these values. And you can change the style how you want to see it as well. You can convert the line chart to a bar chart so that you get the information in a bar format. Let's go back to the overview page and click on this activity log. This is where you would be able to get more information regarding all the activities which happened within this deployment. You can always add filter to and search for a particular resource type, and you can drill down and gain more insight into what happened in that deployment. So in the examination, if you find any questions related to where you can find more information related to this deployment, you can say that under resource group, go to activity log. This is where you can find these informations. So that completed this lab exercise. I hope you find this information useful. In this lab exercise, we will configure the Cloud Shell and use Azure PowerShell module to create a resource group and a virtual machine. And we are going to review Azure Advisor recommendation towards the end of this lab. So let's go and do that. So after you log into your Azure portal, click on the Azure Cloud Shell by clicking on this icon in the top right of the Azure portal. After opening the Cloud Shell, you have a choice of either using Bash or PowerShell. We are going to select PowerShell here. So first step, if you are not using or if you have not used Azure Cloud Shell, the first step is to create a storage account. So I'm going to create a storage account. So click on Advanced Settings. I'm going to use an existing resource group. Give a name for your storage account. And for the file share, give a name as well. After that, click on Create Storage. This would ideally take a minute or so to complete this task. Alright, so our Cloud Shell is getting ready. So you can see that it is trying to connect to the terminal. So one thing you need to make sure that on the top left hand corner, you have selected PowerShell instead of Bash. There are other quick tools available here to either terminate the session. If you need additional help, you can click on that. Modify the settings to increase the size. You can do that. I'm going to quickly increase the size to medium. So I hope you would be able to see what I'm going to do. Then if you want to upload any templates or files or download it, you can use this button to do that. If you want to simultaneously open another session, you can click on this button to open another session, things like that. So first step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a command to clear it. So let's run our first command. So this command is going to help us get the Azure resource group. So you can see that there is a resource group called My Resource Group and with the number of our subscription. Next, I'm going to run a command to install or deploy a virtual machine in this resource group. So it is asking for the user. I'm going to give the username as Azure user and password for the Azure user. And I'm going to provide the password. So since we don't provide any value for the virtual machine, the default size is going to be picked up. Oh, looks like the password I provided is not picked up. So I would have to run this command one more time. I'm going to run this command one more time. Again, provide the username and provide the password and execute it. Alright, so looks like it is creating the Azure resources. So to see that, we have an empty subscription with the empty resource group and no virtual machine. So you can click on virtual machines to see it is being created. So right now you can see that there is no virtual machines here. If I go home and click on resource groups, within my resource group, let me quickly minimize this. All the resources required for this virtual machine is being getting created. So I'm going to click on the Cloud Shell again, and you can see that this has deployed a virtual machine called My VMPS and associated virtual network interfaces, the compute disk and everything associated for this virtual machine is being created as well, or at least it is in the creation process. So let's go back to our Azure homepage and click on virtual machines. You can see that My VMPS is being created. This is how we use the PowerShell commands to interact with this and create the virtual machine. Now the next task is, let's go and show you in the Azure Advisor. So Azure Advisor is a service which you can use within Azure to get a recommendation and best practices for your Azure services. So on the global search box, type in Azure Advisor and select Advisor. So right under the overview pane, this is where you would be able to find recommendations. These recommendations are grouped by cost, security, reliability, operational excellence, and performance. Because this is a brand new subscription, we are not able to see any recommendation, but if you give it time and in your real actual environment, if you go to your advisor, this is where you would be able to find all sort of recommendations which you can use within your Azure subscriptions. These include enabling or recommending you to enable just-in-time network access, or adding reserved instance for your virtual machines so that you can reduce the cost, or any sort of security best practices or recommendations as well. And you would be able to download these reports in a PDF or a CSV format, or additionally you can create alerts as well. So that completed this exercise. In this lab exercise, we are going to use Azure CLI using Azure Cloud Shell to create a virtual machine and show you how you can run this command using the CLI. This is pretty similar to the one which we did just now using the PowerShell. Instead of PowerShell, we are going to use Bash. So let's go and do that. Like the last exercise, to use the Bash, you can click on Cloud Shell. And this time, instead of PowerShell, we are going to select Bash. We are going to follow the same process we did for the last time. I'm going to create a storage account and file share, which is necessary for this task, and click on Create Storage. Alright, so like PowerShell, make sure you have chosen Bash in this exercise. Rest everything remains the same. To get the details about the existing resource group, run AZ group command. It gives you all the information related to your resource group. The resource group is called My Resource CLI, and the number associated to that resource group. And if you want to group this list in a table format, you can run this command. So this is a good information. So I'm going to copy the name of the resource group, or at least I know what is the resource group name. All right, so we run the command. So I had some issues with giving the parameter for the image. So there was an issue with Ubuntu LTS. So right now it is creating this virtual machine. So if I go back to my Azure portal, click on virtual machines, quickly minimize this, you can see that there is a Linux virtual machine created. And this whole exercise was creating a virtual machine using CLI instead of PowerShell. So I hope you find this information useful. In this lab exercise, we are going to create an Azure Key Vault and then create a password secret within that Key Vault, providing a securely stored, centrally managed password for use with any applications. So let's go and do that. Use the global search box to search for Key Vault, and under services, select Key Vault. Since we don't have any Key Vault, click on Create. Like other exercises, we are going to retain the same subscription. I'm going to retain the same resource group. Under Key Vault name, give a name for your Key Vault. So I'm going to call it Key Vault and my subscription number. I'm going to retain the region as East US and the pricing tier as standard. We are not going to modify anything in this Key Vault. So I'm going to click on Review and Create, and click on Create. Alright, so our Key Vault deployment is completed. So click on Go to Resource to go directly to the Key Vault you just created. So under the overview pane, please take a note of your Vault URI. So this is the URI your applications can use to access your Vault through the REST APIs. Please take a note under settings. This is where you would be able to access your keys, secrets, certificates, and access policies. Other items you can see here are networking, security, etc. So now let's go and add a secret to your Key Vault. So to do that, go under settings and click on secrets, and click on generate and import. Under upload options, I'm gonna put manual. You can either choose certificate as well. Give a name for your secret. So I'm gonna call it example password, and provide a value for your password. You can set your activation date and expiration date if you want to do that. And if you don't, click on create. So once the secret has been successfully created, you can see the status of this example password secret we created turned to enabled. And if you click on this newly created secret and click on the current version, this is where you can find the secret identifier. This is a URI. This URI value can be used with any of the application, and it provides a centrally managed and securely stored password. And if you scroll down, if you want to see the value what you have given, you can click on show secret value. That will show you the value what you have given. That's a quick example of how you can create and implement a key vault. So I hope you find the information provided useful. In this lab exercise, we are going to go through how you can secure your network traffic. To do that, first we are going to create a virtual machine. Then we are going to create a network security group or NSG. And we're going to configure the inbound and outbound security port to allow RDP and deny internet access. Let's go and do that. So the first task is to create the virtual machine. So you have seen a couple of times already how to create a virtual machine. So click on virtual machines. Since we don't have any, click on create a virtual machine. Make sure you select the right subscription and resource group. Give a name for your virtual machine. I'm going to call it simple Windows virtual machine. Pick a region where you want to keep this virtual machine. I'm not going to add any availability option. Security is type as standard, and on the image I'm going to pick Windows Server 2019 data center Gen 2. The size I'm going to keep it as D2SV3. Give a username and password. I'm going to give the admin user Azure user. Provide the password for the admin user. Under inbound rule, this time I'm going to keep it as none. So that means there is no access to this virtual machine because we are going to use the network security group. We're not going to make any other changes on disk and go to networking. I'm going to retain all the default like the virtual network and subnet, public IP, etc. But under NIC, I'm going to select none. It's not NIC, it's network security group. So in the previous exercises, we used a basic one. So this time we are going to create one from scratch. So that's why I selected none. Let's go to management. And under boot diagnostic, I'm going to disable it and I'm going to click on review and create and click on create. So our virtual machine deployment is completed. I'm going to click on go to resource. And this is the virtual machine we created, simple Windows virtual machine. Now, since we don't have a network security group, now let's go and create a network security group. So I'm going to go back to the home page, click on create a resource, type in network security group and hit enter and select the network security group and click on create. I'm going to keep the network security group in the resource group we selected. Give a name for the next one is giving a name for your network security group. I'm going to call it as my NSG secure. Keep the region as East US because we want to use it with our virtual machine we created, and click on review and create. After the validation, click on create. Alright, so that was quick. So our NSG is being created. So click on go to resource to see the network security group. So if you scroll down, this is where you would be able to see the inbound and the outbound security rules for this network security group. So now let's go to our virtual machine and attach this network security group which we just now created. So go under network, go under virtual machine, select the virtual machine, go under networking. You can see that there is no inbound and outbound ports added to this network. So select the network interface. Under settings, click on network security group, and instead of none, here I'm going to select the newly created network security group, which is my NSG secure, and click on save. Now if you go back to your virtual machine, select that, click on networking. Now if you scroll down, you can see that there is inbound ports and outbound port rules added to this virtual machine. This is a default rule, which is basically denying any inbound and outbound connection to this virtual machine. Now let's go back to the overview tab and try to connect this virtual machine using RDP and download the RDP file and click on open, click on connect, provide the password and hit OK. Click yes. Now that we have attached the NSG rule, let's go back to the inbound security rule, and this time we are going to create a new inbound port rule and we're going to allow RDP. So click on add, click on source as any, source port range asterisk, destination any, destination port as 3389, protocol TCP, action allow, priority I'm going to give it 300, and under name I'm going to modify this to allow RDP and hit on add. So that's how you add RDP inbound rule to this network security group. So before we test this rule, we are going to modify the outbound security rule. So click on outbound security rule, click on add. This time what we are going to do is we are going to deny internet access from this virtual machine. So let's go and create a deny rule. So under source any, port range asterisk, destination we are going to put service tag, and destination service tag is internet, protocol TCP, action deny, priority I'm going to give 4000 and give a name for this rule. So I'm going to say that deny internet and click on add. All right, so we created two rules. The first one is to allow RDP to this virtual machine, and the second one is the outbound rule, which is to deny any internet traffic within this virtual machine. So now let's go back to the virtual machine, click on virtual machine, select your virtual machine. If you go under networking and scroll down, you can see that under inbound rule it is allowing RDP access, and under outbound rules it is denying the internet traffic. So let's go and test that. First, let's connect to this virtual machine. Go to the overview tab, click on connect and download the RDP file and try to connect. Provide the username and password and connect to this virtual machine. Alright, so I hope the information provided in this lab was helpful. Let's go and do the next lab. In this lab exercise, we are going to manage access with role-based access control. In the first step, we are going to view and assign roles. And in the second task, we are going to monitor role assignments and remove a role. So let's go and do that. To view and assign roles, you can assign it in a resource group level or a resource level or on a subscription level. So let's go to a resource group now. So click on resource groups and select any of the resource group you have it within your Azure subscription. And on the left hand side under the activity log, click on access control and IAM. This is where you would be able to add or remove role-based access for any user within your organization within this resource group. So if you go under role assignment and first let's go to the roles. This is where you would be able to find a large number of role definitions available, which is custom created by Microsoft for you. So if you want to know further, you can click on any of these roles. It actually tells you what sort of permission level you can assign with this particular role. So let's switch back to the role assignments. And if you want to add any user, you have to click on add, and that will give you an option to add a role assignment, or you can add co-administrator or custom roles. These two are disabled because the subscription which I'm using is a lab environment. They basically disable this access for me. So that's why I'm not able to add it. I'm going to click on add a role assignment, and under search for role description or role name or description, you can basically select anything. I'm going to search for virtual machine contributor role and select that and click on members. This is where you can either add a user, group or service principal name. And to add a member, click on add a member and select a user which you want to give the contributor access to and click on select. To assign it, all you have to do is click on add and review plus assign. So this user will have a contributor role assigned to this resource group. So the next task is how can you monitor a role assignment? To monitor, just go to activity log, click on activity log. Within that, click on add a filter So within the activity log, this is where you would be able to see any sort of changes happened within this resource group recently. And you would be able to scroll down or click on add filter to add extra filters to check if there is any role assignment happened. So as you can see here, if I scroll down, you can see that there is a role assignment related task which is happened. The next is to remove a role assignment. All you have to do is go to access control IAM, click on role assignments, select the user which you want to remove the access to. So I'm going to go back to virtual machine contributor role and click on remove and click yes. So that's how you add or remove role assignment for a particular user within a resource group, or it could be in a subscription level or a resource group level. So that completed this lab. In this lab exercise, we are going to learn how to manage resource locks. First, we are going to verify the existing resource group and add a lock. Then we are going to test the deletions to see if it is working or not. Then we are going to test deleting a member of the resource group, and finally we are going to remove the resource lock. So let's go and do that. So let's go and add a lock to the resource group and test the deletion. So I'm going to go to the resource groups, select the resource group what we have. On the left hand side, under settings, click on locks. We don't have any locks at the moment, so click on add lock. Give a name. I'm going to call it resource group. I'm going to call it a resource group lock. The lock type as delete. If you want to add any nodes, you can add that and click on OK. So the newly created lock is being established. Now let's go and try to delete this resource group. So go back to the overview tab and click on delete the resource group. To delete it, you have to give a name for the deletion. So I'm gonna copy the same name, paste it and click on delete. So you should get this message because now we have put a lock to prevent any sort of deletion within this resource group. So the delete task is failed because there is a lock. That's why you cannot delete this resource. Now let's go and test delete a member of the resource group. So for that, we are going to create some resource within this resource group. So let's go to the resource group. I don't have any resources. I'm going to click on create and I'm going to select a storage service. I'm going to create a storage account. Let's hit enter and select a Microsoft storage account. Click on create. Make sure you select the right subscription and resource group. Give a unique storage account name. And rest all the values, I'm going to keep it default because I'm going to anyway. All right, so the validation is being passed and click on create. So the deployment is in progress and go to home, go to resource groups, make sure we hit refresh to see the newly created resource. So it is going to take a little more time. All right, so our resource has been created. Click to go to resource. What we are going to test right now is we have a resource within our resource group. Let's go and check. So go under the resource group. Now you can see that there is a resource within your resource group. Now let's try to delete just the resource. Previous exercise, we had tried to delete the resource group itself. It failed. Now let's try to delete the resource. Give yes for confirmation and click on delete. All right. So again, there is an error. It says that, okay, you cannot delete it because there is a lock associated with it. That's why it is failed. Now let's try to remove the lock. So I'm going to go under settings, click on locks, delete the lock, go back to the resource group overview. And this time I'm going to click on the resource and click on delete. Give a confirmation and try to delete this time. Yes. So this time it already deleted the resource and we can either delete the resource group as well because there is no lock. So that's the end of this lab. In this lab exercise, we are going to create a policy assignments that requires tagging and create a storage account and test the tagging. Then we will review with the specified tag and remove the tagging policy. Let's go and do that. First, let's go and create a policy. Even though regarding Azure policy, I will create another lab specifying what is Azure policy and things like that. So for this tagging, I just want to create a policy to test this. So search for policy and select policy. So on the left hand side under authoring, click on assignments and click on select and assign policy. The scope of our policy is the subscription wide. So we are going to assign this policy on our subscription. We are not providing any exclusions at the moment. Under basics, go to policy definition and click on this ellipsis and search for a policy. So I'm going to search for a policy called require a tag and its value on resources. So I'm going to search require a tag, right, the first one. So make sure you select this one, which is require a tag and its value on resources, and click on select. Scroll down, click next to go to the parameters. Give a name for the tag. I'm gonna call company and the value as Contoso, and click on review and create, and click on create. So the policy has been created and assigned. But please note that in your lab environment, if you are testing, this sort of a policy would take at least around 30 minutes to take effect. So now let's go and create a storage account to test if the tagging is required. So I might get an error because I'm going to do it immediately, but usually I should wait for at least 20 to 30 minutes before doing this test. So I'm going to click on create a resource, search for storage, select the storage account and click on create. I'm going to retain the subscription as it is. Resource group, I'm going to select my resource group tags. Under storage account name, give a name. It has to be a unique name for your storage account. I'm going to retain in East US. Standard redundancy, I'm going to keep it LRS. Now let's click on review and create. If the policy is assigned now, then I should get a error message because the tag is missing. Looks like the validation is being passed, so I'm going to wait for some more time to make sure the policy is being kicked in. All right, so let's do one more time. So I'm going to click on review and create. All right, so the validation is being failed. So let's click on this validation failed to see what's the error message like. As you can see that in the error details, you are not able to create it because there is a policy which is preventing it. This requires a tag and its value on resources to create it. Now let's go and provide that value. So I'm gonna cancel this and I'm gonna go back to tags and I'm gonna provide name as company and the value as Contoso and hit on review and create. The validation is being passed. I will be able to create this resource without any problem. So our deployment is in progress. Let's wait for a minute or so to complete the deployment. All right. So click on go to resource to go to the newly created storage account. So if you click on tags, you can see the tag is associated. Another way to search for all the resources have tags or specifically drilling down resources based on tag. All you have to do is go to search box and type in tag and select tags. And you can see that these are the tags which is assigned, and I can click on Contoso and you can see all the resources which is tagged with Contoso company tag. All right, so that's the end of this lab and I hope you find it useful. In this lab exercise, we are going to create an Azure policy and create a policy assignment and test the policy what we created. This is going to be testing a location policy. And finally, we will delete the policy assignment. So let's go and do that. To create an Azure policy, go to the global search box and type in policy and select the policy. On the left hand side under authoring, click on definitions. So this is where you would be able to find predefined or pre-created already available definitions for you. You can either create a brand new one or you can duplicate it and you can create one as well. Right on top, you can either search by definition type or a specific category, or you can search by name. So let me quickly search just the compute one. So I'm gonna type in compute and search, and all the policy what you see over here are compute related. So that's definitions. Now let's go back to assignments. So click on assignments. An assignment is a policy that has been assigned to take place within a specific scope. For example, a definition could be assigned to the subscription scope. So click on assign policy. This is the ellipsis you can click to assign it to a particular scope. So I have assigned this to our subscription. We only have one subscription. And this is called scope. A scope determines what resources or grouping of resources the policy assignment applies to. In our case, we could assign this policy to a specific resource group. However, we choose to assign this policy on a subscription level. So please be aware that resources can be excluded based on the scope configurations. And these exclusions are totally optional. Let's go to the definitions and click on this ellipsis. So I'm gonna search for a definition which is gonna allow me to prevent anything created other than a different location. So I'm gonna search for location and hit enter. Based on the keyword, it is showing all the policies with location keyword built in. So this is the policy we want to select. This is called allowed location. This policy enables you to restrict the locations your organization can specify when deploying resources. So I'm going to select that and click on select. Oops, it automatically selected something different. So I'm going to go back, put location again, scroll down till you find allowed location. Okay. And click on select. Scroll down. We are not making any changes here. Click next to go to parameters. And under allowed location, I'm gonna pick Japan West and click on review and create. After the validation, click on create. All right, so the policy has been created successfully. So I think we will have to again wait for at least 20 to 30 minutes for this policy to get kicked in. And then we are gonna test the allowed location policy. How we are gonna test is we are gonna create a resource, and while creating, we will choose any location other than Japan West, and we should not be able to do that. So let's go back to the Azure homepage. I'm going to go to my resource group. I'm going to pick the resource group where we are going to create this. Looks like I don't have any other resource in my resource group. I'm going to click on create, look for storage and select the storage account and click on create. Provide the default information like where you want to host it. I'm going to select my resource group. Give a unique storage account name. I'm going to call it storage account and my subscription number. Under region, I'm going to retain East US, but technically it should not allow me to create the storage account anywhere except Japan West. So under redundancy, I'm going to choose LRS, and that's about it. So now let's click on review and create. It should fail at the validation process. So now this is running the final validation. We should technically get an error message because of the policy we created. All right, so looks like the validation has been failed. Click on the failed validation to see the details. As you can see that the policy is failed because of applying this allowed location. So now what I can do, I can go to another Azure tab and we can go and delete the assignment we created. I'm going to go under policy and go to the assignments. We can see that there is allowed locations policy attached. So I'm going to click on that and click on delete assignment. Click yes. This is deleting the assignment and successfully deleted. I'm going to go back to other Azure portal. This time I'm going to close this error message. Go previous, make sure that we give some time and make sure that we have selected any location. So now technically we should be able to create this storage account anywhere we like because there is no policy preventing us to create in a specific location. So I'm going to click on review and create. Let's give this some more time and click on review and create. It is running the validation. Looks like it is still taking from the cache. So I'm going to go back to the resource group and I'm going to quickly create one more. So type in storage, select the storage account, click on create. I'm going to place it under my resource group to test the policy. I'm going to call it as storage account 594209. And we are not going to make any other change apart from this. So let's click on review and create. It is running the validation. The validation is been passed. Click on create to create the storage account. So that's the end of Azure policies. I hope you find this useful. So in this lab exercise, we are not going to go through the Azure environment, but I'm going to give you a walkthrough and we are going to access the compliance offerings, service trust portal and compliance manager. This is quite important if you are studying for Azure Fundamentals. You can expect questions on these. The first, access the Microsoft compliance offerings. So you can find all of these compliance offering by going into Microsoft Compliance Regulatory Offerings homepage. The offerings are grouped into global, US government, industry, and regions. These compliance offerings are grouped into global, US government, industry, and regional. So let's assume you want to go through ISO 27701. You click on that. You can get information about how Microsoft have validated this for each of their services. So if you scroll down this page, you can find more information about Azure related to this particular compliance standard here. So if you are in lookout for these compliance information, this is the page you can come and navigate and get the information what you're looking for. The next one is Service Trust Portal. The Microsoft Service Trust Portal is also referred as STP. So what is this Service Trust Portal? Service Trust Portal provides a repository Azure users to provide customers with Azure compliance documentation, white papers, and reports. This includes documents like SSP that shows how Azure satisfies compliance requirements, etc. And you can go through this audit report to find more granular information about what you are looking at. Again, you can expect at least 1 or 2 questions from either compliance offerings or service trust portal or compliance manager. Another portal is compliance manager. So you can go to compliance manager, click on compliance manager, sign in with your Microsoft account, and this is where you can easily find or perform risk assessments of Microsoft Cloud Services. And you can use Compliance Manager to manage your organization's compliance activities from implementation to reporting. In this walkthrough, we are going to go through Azure Pricing Calculator. I'll help you understand how you can configure your pricing calculator, and we will do a quick review on how you can create a pricing estimate and download that estimate. Let's go and do that. You can access the pricing calculator by going into azure.microsoft.com and pricing calculator. So right on the top, you can find all the products, some example scenarios where you want to create these pricing estimate real quick. If you want to save these estimates, you can do that, but you would have to log in to save your estimates and some of the frequently answered questions, including licensing and minute cost estimates details. So click on products. If you want to get the pricing for yourself or your customer for a virtual machine, select that, or you can go to the global search box and type in any particular service like backup, for example. So I'm gonna click on virtual machine, and that immediately add that on the pricing estimate. So you can click on this view button. So before I create a pricing estimate, I first name it. So I either name it by the customer name, and then I'm gonna name it with an identifier which tells me what type of estimate this is. So it's easier for me to save it and recognize it and download it. Second, because we added virtual machine, there is an option for you to name this virtual machine as well. So if you are creating this virtual machine for application server, so just type in as application server so you know what it is. When you select a virtual machine, these price can be varied depending on where you're going to deploy as well. So make sure you pick the right region so you get the accurate pricing for that region. Under operating system, we have multiple options. If you choose Windows, the license for this Windows is included with your Azure invoice. So there will be two line items. One will be for the compute and another one for the license. Under type, you can pick what type of operating system you want. Tier determines basic or standard. Category, so you can basically tell, okay, what type of workload you're going to deploy. Is it a general purpose, or do you want a GPU intensive machine? Based on your selections, the instance family will change. So if I change it to general purpose, the instance would be mostly A, B, and D series virtual machines, or the family size. So I'm going to pick high performance compute. So that will give me high performance compute option. So let's assume if I am after an 8-core 56 GB RAM machine, I select that. How many number of virtual machines you need? I need 2 for my application server. This value indicate the amount of hours you're going to run this virtual machine. 730 will be approximately giving you a month of runtime. But if you're going to automate and reduce the time, you can specify how much time you're going to run. So let's keep it 730 so you can get estimate for a month. So we are not going to change it. Under savings option, you have multiple options. One, if you reserve this virtual machine, that means Microsoft will give this compute for you for a cheaper rate if you commit to Microsoft that you're going to save it for a year. So I can click on 1 year or 3 year. Based on that, I get extra retention. If you already own the licenses, you can click on hybrid usage benefit. So that means you don't have to pay Microsoft for the licensing cost. As you can see on the right hand side, when I select license included, the price changes. As long as I click on hybrid usage benefit, that I'm telling Microsoft that I already have the license, so you can see the price reduced to half, nearly half. Then if you scroll down, there is an option for you to add a disk. So you can either choose a standard hard disk, which is a magnetic type disk, or SSD, which is a solid state drive. Under redundancy, this means you can either choose to keep it LRS, which gives you 3 copies, or zone redundant service, which will give you high redundancy from any data center failures. So let's keep LRS. Disk size will determine what is the size of your disk. So if you want to have a 1 terabyte disk, you can add that, and I want 2 disks for these 2 virtual machines. You can see that the cost of the disk is also added. If you want to add snapshot, that is a backup, you can enable that. That will again give you an option how much is the size. So I'm going to again put 2 TB. So that's going to give me cost for how much is for the backup. If you are aware of any storage transaction going to happen, this is sometimes tricky to find out the storage transaction. You can add that to get an estimate on that. Bandwidth should be definitely added because any data you take out of Azure is going to cost you. So I'm going to pick internet egress, which is data coming out. So 300 GB of data coming out of Azure is going to cost another $25. So this is how you add Azure services and create an estimate. On top of it, if you want to add Azure storage account, click on add Azure storage account. Pick a region, what type of storage account. I'm going to keep it file storage. How much I need 2 terabytes. Snapshot 1 terabyte, and you can see the cost of that as well. So Right now, the total cost is around 2000, which include the virtual machine and the file storage we created. The next option is you can either export it, save it, or share it. When you click on share, you need to log in and you get a link to share, so you can send that to anybody. The second is you can export it. When you export, it tries to download the file. This comes in an Excel file. You can even add more details on these columns, or you can modify or put your own branding before you share this with your customer. All right, so that's the end of this Azure Pricing Calculator lab. In this exercise, we are going to go through Azure TCO calculator. TCO means total cost of ownership. We can use this TCO calculator to generate cost comparison report for an on-premises environment. So let's go and find out how to do that. First, you can access this by going into azure.microsoft.com/pricing TCO calculator to access this website. So let's assume you are working on an on-prem and you are trying to migrate these workload into Azure. And if you want to find out what's the total cost of ownership look like, how much savings you can gain over time when you move into Azure, these things can be loaded here. And finally, you can download the report which can get you these insight in detail. So click on add a server workload to add workload in your environment. So this gives you information about adding your Windows or Linux servers, your physical environment details or virtual machine details, what type of operating system it is, how many number of servers you have. So I'm going to put 20 servers, and number of cores and RAM you have, memory, GPU instance you got, things like that. You get the point, right? I don't have an on-prem environment, but you can add all of these details. Similarly, you can add your databases, the number of databases, etc. If you have an on-prem RAID storage or local SAN devices, you can add all of those details here. And once you populate all of these details, click next. This is where you're going to adjust your assumptions. Like, do you happen to have a software assurance which gives you extra benefits in terms of saving on the licensing cost, etc. Other details like, do you want to have a GRS storage which gives you extra redundancy in terms of your workloads running in Azure. You can provide details on your virtual machine cost, which enables this to calculate a not recommended B2S virtual machines. What's your electricity bill cost like? Because these are the things we overlook when we just look at the cloud cost. We sometimes ignore the cost or the rent for the place where we host these data center resources. Additionally, you can put the storage cost like your procurement cost, your ongoing management cost, your tape drive backup cost, etc. You will definitely have, if you have a data center, IT labor who just manages the physical data center or physical servers, like a full-time administrator, or you may be giving it to a contract employees where you can provide the hourly rate. So it will tell you how much you can save on that. It's not about replacing people. It's about giving you an indication like once you move into the cloud where all you can gain benefit over time. And on the other assumptions tab, you can expand these and you can load those details. Click next. And finally, you can put in your timeline on how you want this report to be generated, what type of licenses. And towards the end, based on your region, you will be able to download a report that will include details like the time frame and how much cost indication you can expect if you move all of these workloads what you defined in your on-prem environment into Azure, how much cost you can save over time as well. And you can download this report in PDF format or Excel file, and you can modify this for your requirement. So this is one of the cool tool which you should be knowing if you're studying for Azure, especially Azure Fundamentals. What is TCO calculator, which is total cost of ownership calculator. So that's the end of this lab. So in this lab exercise, we are going to learn how to open an Azure support request. So when you work on Azure, it is important for you to understand and identify how you can open support plans, what are the options available for you as a technical resource or a billing resource, and where you can find these details. So let's go and find that. So to open a support ticket and find out where you can see all of this information, go to the global search box and type in help and support and select that. On the left hand side under support, this is where you can find your previously created support requests, the details, etc. Support plans give you information about different types of plans you can purchase or avail from Microsoft. Service health gives you details about the latest service outages or uptime of these services within Azure. So sometimes before raising a support ticket, you can keep a note here. If you finding degraded performance or site availability, this is one place I would recommend you to come and have a look at first before creating a support ticket. So go back to support plan. Advisor is somewhere where you can get recommendations and best practices on your Azure workload and services. So we looked into that before. So to create a support ticket, click on create a support request. Under issue type is where you would specify either it is a billing issue or a technical issue. So select technical. If you do happen to have multiple subscription, make sure you select the right one before submitting your technical issue. Is it a specific service or all services? So if it is a specific service, you have an option to pick what it is related to. I'm going to say it's an Azure dedicated host issue. You can provide a summary. You need to actually provide a summary and a problem type for the issue before proceeding further. So I'm going to change it to all services. Again, this gives you information about what you can fill. And once you provide the details, click next. Azure would give you potential resolutions what you can follow in terms of the option you selected. So if you have already followed this, click next. Since I don't have an option to provide additional information, so this is where you can provide additional details and click on review and create to submit your support request. Similarly, if I go back to the support ticket, this time instead of technical, I'm going to put billing. The options will change accordingly. So you can provide the summary, problem type as is it cost management or is it a refund request. Based on that, you can provide the information and submit your details. So that's how you create a support ticket within Microsoft Azure. And I hope the information provided throughout this lab was useful. If you're studying Azure for the first time, I really appreciate your taking initiative to learn this. And if you're studying this for your examination, I wish you all the very best for your examination. I will see you on the next one. Until then, take care.